Our next speaker is Chance Strickland. We're really excited to have Chance here. He is a software engineer on the Remix team. He loves traveling, surfing, and helping developers like me build better websites. And Chance, I could have used you a few minutes ago as I was running into my own issues. But we are so happy to have you. Chance, how you doing today?
Hey, doing great. There's nothing like doing it live and running into all of the fun experiences that come with that, right?
That's right. Yeah. It would have helped if I was clicking the right button, deploying the right version of the site, but we got through it. Chance, we're really excited to have you today. I must say the mustache looks great. It comes through great on the stream. I'm a big fan. Chance, tell me, how long have you been with the Remix folks now?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because I joined the Remix folks a couple of different times actually before Remix was a thing, and I worked with Ryan and Michael a couple years back on the Reach UI library, if you're familiar. It's a library of accessible React components, and we worked on that for a little while under the umbrella of the React Training Company. React Training, as the name implies, is a training company for teaching folks how to use React. And I actually shifted from Reach UI to working with the modules team on Radix UI. And then I ended up coming back to React Training as an instructor. So I did work on all of that for a little while. And shortly thereafter, Remix became a thing, and decided to start working on Remix with them pretty much right from the get-go. So as soon as it became an actual product, I jumped over, started working with that team, and it's been a lot of fun.
Well, that's great, and we're glad that you are. I've really enjoyed your work, keeping up with your work a little bit as you've gone from the Reach UI. So I think Reach UI is an awesome project. Everyone should go check it out if they haven't. But without further ado, let's get you into your talk so you have the most time possible. So if you wouldn't mind sharing your screen, and I'll get you going.
Yeah, let's go ahead and do that. Boom, 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 boom. And I'm going to go entire screen. We're going to see what happens with that.
Yeah. Hopefully you don't.
And I'm going to do like a little split view here.
Cool.
So I think that'll be good. So let's talk about optimistic UI, shall we? So when we create any sort of web app that has to deal with data mutations in a database on a server somewhere, you're going to need to give the user some sort of feedback, right? Like as data is being mutated and changed, it's going off to a server. We send this request off. There's some processing happening. It's going to send us a response, and depending on the connection speed, we may or may not get that response back in a timely manner. And while that's happening, obviously we have to show the user something, right? We can either not show them any sort of pending state. We could potentially give them a loading spinner or something. So we've got this idea of a pending UI where we indicate to the user that something's happening, but it might be taking a little time and they should wait before proceeding to do whatever the next thing they might do is, right? So that's our pending UI. And we also have this concept of an optimistic UI. Don't mind, you might hear my dog over here. She just started growling at the mailman, so apologize if there's any noise there. She starts barking, but anyway, back to the point. There's also our optimistic UI, which just means that we can show the user some sort of response that we think the server is going to return, or that we're pretty confident the server is going to return to us a certain response. So instead of waiting for that to happen, we can just go ahead and update the UI with what we are pretty sure is going to come back anyway. And then we can go ahead and update the UI much faster that way, right? So pending UI is going to be most likely more accurate, but it can be a little slow at times, especially if the user is working with a slow connection. Conversely, if they have a really fast connection, we can run into another problem where we show a pending UI too fast, and then you end up with this janky experience where there's all kinds of stuff happening on the screen way too fast, and it just creates a lot of moving things and just feels funny. And this is where React comes in and says, hey, we've got this suspense thing where we can only show you the next UI if the response takes a certain amount of time to come back, in which case then we'll show our loading spinner. So we sort of defer that, right? So we've got these workarounds. But I'm going to talk about optimistic UI, because optimistic UI can show the user feedback pretty much immediately, which makes the app feel much faster. But oftentimes we avoid implementing our optimistic UI because it's hard, right? Like it's hard just on an implementation level sometimes to get it right. But it's also just fundamentally hard because we don't always know what the server is going to give us, right? Like if we knew ahead of time, we wouldn't need the server in the first place. So, and what happens if the response we get back is different from the response that we guessed, right? What happens if the server throws an error, right? We have to deal with that error. What happens if there are race conditions and the responses come back in a slightly different order from the request we initially sent off? So there's a lot of foot guns here, a lot of potential problems. And so it's often easier to avoid it. And we just do what we always do and create these pending UIs. But again, in certain cases, optimistic UI, it can make our apps feel much, much faster and create a better user experience. So I'm going to show you how we could implement something like that in Remix and how these APIs, I think, make it a little nicer. So I've got this app here. I'm going to go ahead and run our dev script. This is a Remix app, obviously. We're going to go ahead and load it up, and it's just a simple task list here. We've got some tasks, and what we want to do is right now I've got a pending UI. So if I start clicking around on various tasks, it's going to go and update my database. And this is all running locally. My database is going to be super snappy, but I've got some artificial blockers so that it takes a little bit of time between updates. So you'll notice if I click one of these tasks to check it off the list, it's going to eventually update. And I'm going to go in real quick and clear something out because I have missed a thing in the interim period. Sorry about that. Ignore what goes behind the curtain. As I was saying, we've got this slower response. So it's going to take a couple seconds or half a second or so before this is actually completed. And in the interim, we sort of fade out to, we have a lower opacity to indicate that this thing is actually loading, and we're not updating it immediately. So it feels a little slow, but once the response comes back, we update our little check mark to indicate that this is complete. It's now green, and we can move about our day. I can also create some new tasks. So explain how great Prisma is with Remix. And that's just Prisma is in general, right? Prisma's awesome. So explain how great Prisma is. And see, it took a couple seconds there too, and eventually we got our new task. And in the interim, you may have noticed that we disabled the task field so that we could prevent adding continuous tasks. So this is our pending UI, right? So what if we wanted to set this up as an optimistic UI, optimistic updates for our tasks specifically, so that when I click one of these tasks, it actually updates immediately. And so let's go in and take a look and see what that looks like. So just to sort of walk through our app for a second, we've got our Remix app. If you're familiar with Remix already, you'll know that in every Remix app, we've got our app folder. In our app folder, we've got our routes folder, and that routes folder is exactly what it sounds like. It's our routes. It's the routes for our application. So right now I'm just on localhost 3000, which is my root, my index app. So inside of routes, I've got this index file, and this is our route. This is exactly what we're looking at. And this is our only UI route, right? We'll talk about our task routes here in a few minutes. But right now, we've got everything on this index route, and we've got a few things in the file that we can talk about. We've got this loader. The loader is going to, this is our artificial wait method that's just sort of slowing down the initial request a bit. I actually can get rid of that here. And we are fetching some tasks from our database. We're importing this database helper from this server module, which is just setting up Prisma and connecting to everything. And this is how we're going to interface with our Prisma data calls. So we're fetching some tasks from the server in our loader. The loader is basically responsible for making GET requests to a server, and anything that we return from our loader is going to be available in our route component. Also important to note that the loader is only ever called or used on the server. We code split all of this stuff out. So anything that's in your loader will not be included in your ultimate client bundle. But the actual route component itself, what we see on the screen, is our default export from this route file. So we've got this default export, this component, and this is what we're going to ultimately see, right? We've got these tasks that we've got from this use loader data function, use loader data is it's what we get from our loader, right? So in the event that we have tasks, we return them. If we have an error of some kind, we don't return anything. So it's just nothing, right? So this is where use loader data comes in handy. And we're just iterating through those tasks, and we've got a few different components that we use to actually render them. So that's just a little quick walkthrough of what you're looking at here in the remix route component. So what I'm really interested in here is our create task component that I've just split out down here for simplicity's sake. So what we want to do is we want to update these tasks pretty much immediately. We don't want to wait on the server to give us a response. We just want to immediately indicate to the user that this task is either complete or not. So one thing that we can look at here is how do we actually indicate our tasks are complete? Well, we've got this is pending state that we determine. We've got a few different things that can tell us whether or not this thing is pending. We've got this clear task state that I'm getting from this this fetchers object, which comes from use fetchers. Now, I'm not going to talk too much about the difference between the use fetcher hook and the use fetchers, but essentially, any route can have multiple requests from a fetcher going off at any given time. A fetcher is essentially an object that represents data that is being sent across the wire, right? And anything that's in a fetcher is happening on that route. So we can request data from any route without navigating to a new route, and that the object responsible for representing that request and all of its various states and any data associated with it is available in a fetcher. And we can have multiple fetchers. So the use fetchers hook lets us deal with any of those fetchers, and we've implemented a fetcher in the in this clear tasks button that is going to delete all of our tasks. So we differentiate a little bit, but the fetcher in our create task component is going to be responsible for managing the request in that specific task. Now that that's all, I hope a little clear what's going on here. We are determining our is pending state based on the state of each of these fetchers, right? We want to show a pending UI in the event that either we're clearing the tasks or we are updating the individual tasks, right? That's responsible for determining this is pending state. And the actual state of our task, right? The is it complete or is it not complete? We see that we've got, or actually that's the wrong component here. Let me jump to the correct component, which is our actual task component. So the create task, I apologize, is actually this input down here, but it's very similar to our actual task component. It has all the same setup for dealing with multiple fetchers. But what's really different here is that the actual state of our completed state, which is slightly different, this actually comes from our object in our database instead. We've got this completed object. We can even take a look at our schema here. This is our Prisma schema that we have a model that represents a task. And the task is going to tell us whether or not it's completed, right? That comes from the server. But what we need here is we don't want this always to come from the server. We want to determine whether or not this component or this task is complete based on the event that the user just initiated, right? We want to optimistically update this state. So to implement this in Remix, it's actually relatively simple. We just need to change the source of truth for our completion state. We need to say, instead of getting this from the database in all cases, we need to determine whether or not we're currently in a pending state. And if we're in a pending state, we want to optimistically reflect the completed or not completed state based on that pending state. So how can we do that? It's actually, I think, quite simple here. We've got this is pending indicator here that is just derived from our various fetcher states. So I'm just going to say, if we're pending, I actually want to show the opposite of what's coming from the database, right? This is just a Boolean state. Our completed is always a Boolean. So if it's currently completed, we want to flip it on its head. If it's currently incomplete, we want to flip it on its head, just return the opposite. And once is pending is false, right? Once our fetcher is done doing what it's doing. And in fact, I'm actually going to change this a bit because we don't want to flip this if our clear task state is loading or submitting. We actually only care about the state of this specific fetcher. So instead of using the is pending state, I'm actually going to do this, right? And I'm going to, let's just for clarity's sake, let's make this two separate variables. I'm going to say is clearing tasks, and I'm just going to look for those specific pieces of data from that specific fetcher, and I'm going to say is updating task, right? And we will just rename a couple of things here. And so we now have two separate variables. We can be a little bit more clear about our intention. So if we're updating this specific task, go ahead and show the inverse of that, right? We are now optimistically updating, because once we get that data back, the fetcher state, the state that we get directly from our fetcher, right? Fetcher.state is going to, fetcher.state can either be submitting, loading, or idle, right? We are looking for that idle state, which means no request is currently incoming. So once that state is set back to idle, this updating task will be resolved to false, and we will have the actual response from our server at that time, right? So let's save that and see what we get. That's nice. So you notice the checkbox actually immediately responds. We are still showing a pending UI here in the sense that the task is grayed out behind, and let's go ahead and change that. That's just happening because of some data attributes I've put on the task itself. So this data pending thing is what I'm looking at. So if we're updating the task, we want to show the pending UI. In this case, I only want to show the pending UI if we're clearing tasks. So I'm just going to change those attributes, and the styles should change accordingly. Boom. Immediate updates, feels much snappier. And I could, if I wanted to, go and start implementing this in my other fetchers as well. I could say if I wanted to create a new task, tree. Notice our pending UI there is still in place. We could update that as well to make it feel a little faster as well. Same thing with our clearing tasks. If clearing tasks takes a while, we might want to optimistically clear those tasks, but we also might not. So before we get too far, let's talk about optimistic UI as a concept, right? We now sort of know how to implement them in Remix, but should we? Well, let's think about, again, going back to the pros and cons of an optimistic UI versus the pending UI. The optimistic, or the pending UI rather, is always going to be technically more accurate based on the data as our source of truth. The optimistic UI, as the name implies, is optimistic that our request will succeed. So let's take a look and see what happens if it doesn't, because we don't want a bunch of jank in our application in case something goes wrong. So I'm going to take a look at this complete route. And I mentioned earlier that we had these other routes in this tasks folder. These routes are what are called resource routes. And Alex is going to talk more about resource routes and some of the cool things you can do with them. But essentially what a resource route is it's only going to expose either an action or a loader. It's only going to handle get or post requests. It's not going to be responsible for rendering a UI. So it's going to return some sort of resource, a response we consider a resource. And in this case, I'm using it to essentially create a nice little REST API. I'm sending a request to this actions endpoint, and based on that request, I'm going to return some data. So when I submit that fetcher form, it hits this endpoint. We're artificially taking a little bit of time to complete the task so that I could illustrate the point with optimistic UI. We're going to go through and process the data from this request, and eventually we're going to return some data based on the response. Okay. So what happens if this throws some sort of an error? Let's simulate that. Let's go ahead and set up a try catch here. I want to make sure that I'm handling my errors. If you don't handle your errors in your loaders or your actions, you're going to end up in your error boundary. I'm not talking about error boundaries today, but I want to handle this directly on the server instead of letting my app UI take the brunt of the error. So in the event that I have some sort of error, I'm going to catch it, and I'm just going to return a response. It's going to be a JSON response. It comes from this Remix helper. I'm going to, let's see, I'm returning a task. I don't have a task, so I'm just going to return null, but I'm going to say, I'm just basically returning the same form error that I did here. I want my data to be consistent in the app, and this will be a 500 response. So I'm going to use the status code there. And let's just throw an error. Let's say if let's just randomly throw. So we'll say if math.random is greater than, let's say 0.3. So just, we'll throw here. And we'll say it's a coin toss. We'll do 0.5. So sweet. We'll just blow the app up in like 50% of the cases, right? So now when I hit this endpoint, we expect that in some cases we're going to get some sort of error. So what happens? We're going to optimistically update this UI, but then we're going to have an error, right? So I'm going to check off some stuff. See, what do we do wrong? So I've got this. So I've got the error here. Oh, I didn't put that in my try catch, did I? This is where an error boundary would come in really handy, but I don't want an error boundary. I want to deal with it on the server. All right, this should be better. Okay, so we got an error, right? What happened? The UI updated immediately, but once the response came back, we fell back to our old state. So we wanted to show some sort of UI, something in our UI to indicate that this request failed, right? So we have this error message here. You could argue that it's not a very good one. We could improve that a bit, but it tells the user that something went wrong. Instead of just flashing the checkbox, we've actually responded. We've sent something helpful in our response. Something went wrong. And in our UI, we actually can handle it. I didn't mean to do that. Let's fix that now. Uh-oh, I goofed up and messed up my full screen experience. So I'm gonna fix that real quick. All right, so anyway, no more fun split screen experience, but that's okay. We can still see what's going on. So we've returned this response and we now have it in the form error that we get from our fetcher data as well, right? So we've handled this a little gracefully, and Remix gives us nice APIs via this fetcher object to interface with both the actual response as well as the response, the request state, as well as any errors that we happen to return in that response. So again, do we want to go in and actually implement this optimistic UI approach everywhere? Do we want to go in and change our creator field to use an let's just try and see if we can get this to pass. Our math.random seems to be throwing much more than 50% of the time. All right, there we go. Cleared up. That response worked out. Do we want to implement this everywhere? I'm not sure. Do we even really want to implement the task? Like, we got a bunch of errors there. I'd argue that if you are dealing with a lot of errors from your server, you probably have some other issues you need to work out. If you're having a lot of errors from your server, you might have some validation problems. You might want to take a look at that. But the question, should I implement optimistic UI throughout this application, really boils down to, can I confidently guess what response the server is going to give to me? In the case of a checkbox, I think so. It's a Boolean response one way or the other. It's really easy to validate those requests. So you can be pretty confident that you're either going to get a true or a false back depending on the previous state of that object, right? So in this case, I have no issues with an optimistic UI, and actually I think optimistic UI is a much nicer experience. In the event that you have some sort of a text input, let's go ahead and remove that random error so we don't have to look at all that stuff anymore. Now, in the case of a text input, it becomes a little more nuanced. Now, you always want to validate your inputs on the server. However, with a text input, what if the user is trying to inject a malicious script here, right? So you want to be sure that we are validating and sanitizing the user's input. And we're going to do all of that on the server because it's probably going to introduce a bunch of expensive operations, and it's just safer to handle it on the server anyway. If you are doing a lot of heavy validation, you probably don't want to replicate all of that validation on the server and on the client. If you have relatively simple validation and you're not drastically changing the data that's coming back from the server, you could argue that maybe I might implement an optimistic UI for this input field as well. That's entirely up to you, but that's sort of the way that I look at assessing these sort of experiences. The same thing with our clear all tasks button. We might not want to just immediately wipe out all the tasks because it would create a lot of jank, right? Optimistic UI can create a lot of jank if the response returns an error. In the event that a task returns an error, it's very little jank because we just show an error message right there in line. We could even move the error message to the right of the task itself, and it would actually create even less of a janky experience because we don't have to move tasks up and down. So these are the sort of considerations I would think through if I were implementing this in my own application. But I think optimistic UI is a really nice experience in a lot of cases, and we often just don't implement it because it's hard. Remix gives us a lot of tools to make it a lot easier, to simplify it via nice APIs, and to create a faster, much more pleasant experience for our users. And with that, I'll turn it over to Alex.
All right, thanks so much, Chance. We really appreciate your time and in preparation, chatting about optimistic UI a bit. I can definitely relate to not wanting to implement it because it's hard. I don't want to deal with the issues, but I really appreciate the thought behind the abstractions that Remix provides you, as well as some of the tools it gives you to make it a lot easier. So that was a great explanation. I appreciate it. We have a really important question in the chat asking if we coordinated shirts today, and we did. We did not, but it worked out well. You know, what can you say?
You could say that I cheated because as you remember, I had to rush off before we started because I realized I had rolled out of bed this morning and hadn't showered. So I saw you ahead of time, and maybe that was in the back of my mind when I chose this shirt.
It was subconscious. It was subconscious. Yeah. Well, maybe next time I can have a mustache, and then we can really match. Anyways, thanks so much, Chance. I really appreciate it. I'm going to drop you and bring Alex aboard, but thanks so much for your time.
Happy to.